Welcome, everybody. We are very happy to see you today. We are here to talk about primary elections and why they are such a big deal in our democracy. We can go to the next slide. And we're just going to start with a bit of housekeeping. Our League of Women Voters rules are be present, be respectful, assume good intent, recognize that the materials, statements, and opinions here are private to our organization and should not be shared without specific consent from the league or the speaker. No party shall record, tape, or otherwise capture or reproduce or broadcast any audio, video, or digital content from this session without specific consent from the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And a question that we always get, so I'm just going to anticipate it now. Will we share the slides after the presentation? And we absolutely will. We can go to the next slide. So here's our agenda. We'll do a quick intro. Why are we doing this? We'll talk about Primaries 101. Why do we have primaries? The challenge of primaries, what voters need to know, and how to talk about primaries. And we can go into the next slide. So welcome, first of all. I'm Elizabeth Warner. I am the Communications Director with the League of Women Voters of Ohio. And my partner tonight is Heather Nye, who is also with the League of Women Voters of Ohio. If you are here, I think it's probably safe to say that you already care about elections and democracy and making sure that people have a real voice in the decisions that affect their lives, our lives. And that matters because right now, the most important parts of our election system, one of the most important parts of the election system that we have, is also one of the most overlooked, and that is why we're here tonight, our primary elections. And I think that there is just a lot of general confusion, misunderstanding about why we have them, how we got here. So we're going to talk about how we did get here, how primaries became such an important part of our elections, and why they matter so much, especially in a state like Ohio. We'll talk about what's at stake in the 2026 midterm elections. Perhaps you've heard, they're kind of a big deal, and why in many cases the most important decisions are being made long before the November general election. But just as importantly, this is about what we can do with that information, because the goal isn't just to understand primaries, it's to help more people see the power that they have in them, to make sure that voters know that they can participate, that their voices carry more weight than they think, and that showing up in a primary can shape what choices that everyone sees later on. So by the end of this, we hope that you will have not only a clearer picture of why primaries matter, but we hope that you will have the tools to talk about them in your own communities in a way that is clear, accessible, and empowering. So let's get into it. So, primaries, what are they? Who are they? Why are we here? Primaries, you'll also hear them referred to as just primary elections. They're elections held to determine which candidates qualify to run for office in the general election. Sometimes candidates from the same party run against each other to win their party's nominations in the general election. Sometimes the candidates are nonpartisan. You'll see that in school board races, sometimes in local city council races, even mayor races. Often judicial races are nonpartisan, and issues can also be part of a primary, and they are always nonpartisan. Who can vote in Ohio's primaries? We're going to talk about this a lot, but we'll start with just saying every eligible voter can vote in a primary. Any voter who can vote for candidates in a primary. In Ohio, we do have to choose candidates from just one party to vote on. It gets a little tricky, and so we'll talk about that more as we go on. And we can go to the next slide. So we have our own primaries. Turns out every state is a little bit different, and there are a couple of different kinds of primaries that we have. So the four basic kinds are open, semi-open, semi-closed, and closed-closed. So a truly open primary is when voters choose which party's ballot to vote on. The private decision doesn't matter. There's not even really a ballot. It's really there's not a specific party ballot. It really is treated just like a general election would be. So this means that a voter could vote for a Democrat in one race and a Republican in another race, and that would be totally fine. We can go, let's see, the semi-open primaries. So in these kind of primary states, voters can choose any kind of party ballot. So it can be a Democratic Party ballot, a Republican Party ballot. In Ohio, we have a third party that is recognized, and that's the Libertarian Party. And actually, in this primary, there are a lot of candidates who are running for their Libertarian primary nomination. So you'll see that in some parts of Ohio. So voters can choose any party's ballot, but the party choice may be regarded as a form of party registration. And we'll get into that as we go on too. And then there are semi-closed. So that's when political parties decide who is allowed to vote, whether they will allow unaffiliated voters to participate before each election cycle, or parties can also allow unaffiliated voters while excluding members of opposing parties. And then there are the closed parties, which are primaries, which are exactly what they sound like. So voters have to be registered as a party member with one party before an election. Unaffiliated voters cannot participate. And we'll talk about this part too more, but I think it's really important to understand, kind of to center yourself in all of this, that nationally, about 45% of Americans now identify as independent voters. That is the largest block of voters in this country. Nationally, about 28% of registered voters are unaffiliated. In Ohio, that's about 37%. So that is a pretty significant number of people. So we're going to do a quiz. Who knows the type of primary state that we are in? What is Ohio? This is fun to watch the numbers go back and forth.
It is fun
Fun.
seeing them go back and forth. We've got a clear lead
Oh,
coming down here. Oh,
yeah, we're
it's like watching race horses.
like genuinely enjoyable. Webinar is fun. You wouldn't think they would go in the same sentence, but we're enjoying it. Okay. I think we're probably at a safe place to say. So, 56% of you said that we live in a semi-open state. Heather, you, la, yep, y'all got it. We're close to being open, but a truly open state is you walk in to the primary election and you just get a ballot, just like you would at a general election. We are, Ohio, we got to be special. We're a little bit trickier than that. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So why do we have primaries? It was not always like this. Primaries were created to give voters more control, to expand democracy. Reformers started pushing for this during the progressive era in the sort of early 1900s when the machine politics period was in full swing. And kind of little by little, primaries became standard as states began to adopt them. It really wasn't until the mid 20th century that primaries became the way for candidates from major parties to be selected. But even then, it was not the same system that we have today. And it was very messy. Kind of the classic example is the 1968 presidential convention in Chicago, which was bloody and violent and difficult. It really wasn't until the 1976 presidential election that primaries as we know them today were put into place. We'll go to the next slide. So we're happy to have these choices, but primaries do bring challenges. More choices, more better. This is a good thing. But primaries kind of magnify the problems that we see in democracy in general. We see the same problems in general elections, and we're going to talk about the first two problems, low turnout and high partisanship. Those are problems for democracy writ large, not just in elections. But in primaries, it's much worse. So the problems are low turnout, high partisanship, and then fewer competitive elections. And those of you who have been through the redistricting wars probably have some thoughts about that. So these problems are kind of when we see them in primaries, they're kind of like democracy's canaries in the coal mine. So let's kind of unpack it a little bit more and let's talk about why. We're going to go to Heather.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So let's talk about the numbers for turnout. And this is who's showing up to vote in our primary elections. And it's about 21% of registered voters participated in the 2022 midterms. Of course, that is going to be the most similar to what the year we're looking at now in 2026, as we are now back in the midterm cycle. But looking at these years, we've got 2020, 2022, and 2024, and you can see it's pretty consistent with the voter turnout being right around 22% average. So that means that for every one primary voter, they're having the influence of nearly 5 votes. That many people are not showing up to participate and having their voice heard and giving a small portion so much power. So we could take this many different ways. Like, why is this happening? What are the reasons? And we talk about a lot of different reasons that people are feeling not feeling compelled to come out and vote. But for this one, we're going to focus on the lack of civic knowledge. Because a lot of times we are finding that voters just don't know what primaries are, who can vote in them, and why they're so important. And I'm sure some of you who have been out talking to voters, you might hear a lot of this where they don't belong to a party, so they don't know that they're eligible, or they feel like it is just very partisan and doesn't apply to them. So what we can do, the good news is that there's a lot we can do about it. And we're going to talk more about the ways that we can help increase voters' knowledge and desire to get out and vote. So,
So,
oops, sorry.
all right, no, go.
So voters report that they feel less inclined to vote in primary elections because they don't receive information about primary elections or options for casting a ballot. This one we see a lot, especially in places where we're having uncontested primaries or even like some of the smaller races that are less funded, like school boards. A lot of times voters are finding out about primaries through candidate outreach. So if campaigns are not putting a lot of time and money into voter outreach, they might not even be hearing that there is an election. Kind of thinking about how people feel after they vote in a primary and the primary is over versus like a presidential election, right? By the time we get to voting, everybody's like, yes, we know, we're tired of the ads, we're tired of the mailers, but they might not be getting that for a primary. So sometimes, talking to people that I know I had this happen last year where I asked some people about, how they knew to go out and vote in the primary, and several of them said because of me. So it really got me thinking about where we can have this space as the nonpartisan voter advocates to just make sure they even know and then they know how they can vote. Another reason is that people think their vote doesn't matter because of the primaries as a party insider fight, and they don't really feel like they belong to that insider group. And that they don't know they're eligible, and just thinking again with that unaffiliated voter, not realizing that they can. And then another bonus of this is like as the nonpartisan voter advocate, um, when we get a voters to participate in the primary, they're far more likely to participate in the general. So kind of thinking about when we're talking about our voter advocate work, everything that we're doing in the primary is just making it easier for us and going to pay off again in November because we're activating people to come out and vote. Elizabeth?
So another big challenge is just partisanship. extreme voters. So voters who turn out in primary elections are not the average voter. They tend to be representative of the far ends of their party. So that means that primary voters kind of reward ideological purity. So candidates who pander to the extreme voters that tailor their messaging and their policy objectives to survive the primary, or they are actually extreme themselves, have a higher chance of success in the primary. Um, and so policies that appeal to the majority become secondary. And the people who win in the primaries often are just not candidates that end up exciting the general voting population. So primaries kind of contribute to our toxic hyperpartisan environments in two ways. One is those extreme voters in primaries that kind of force the voters to choose between the lesser of two evils in a general election. And then voters in states that have primaries where voters can't just vote for the candidates that they like, regardless of party, are forced to choose sides. They have to choose Democrats or Republicans, and they are kind of locked into this ideology. Um, by the time that a general election comes around, many voters just don't even connect with the candidates that have kind of made it through that primary gauntlet, and they just stay home. Many voters vote for the kind of least bad or lesser of two evils candidate, but that whole kind of framework is kind of a malaise on our democracy. Even if they do vote, they're not feeling engaged with it. They're not feeling like it's something that has anything to do with them, really. And we're kind of all stuck with these elected leaders who just push us further away from the center, where I think most voters really are. Um, so it's just all these things together create a system where many voters just feel trapped between options that don't really represent what they believe. We can go to the next slide. So again, continuing with the partisanship, it forces an us versus them mentality. So in states where voters can't just vote for the candidates they like, regardless of party, and everyone is forced to pick a side, party ID becomes more important than candidate evaluation. Voters default to a party label, and they're less focused on the qualifications and the experience and the shared values that they might have with a candidate. And voters just have fewer incentives to learn about individual candidates. They see, D, R, sometimes L, and they have kind of a lizard brain reaction and they go with that. So it fuels that hyperpartisanship and that tribalism, that us versus them. It just reduces politics to labels and identity, and it does not solve problems. And that might have a little bit to do with why we are in the place that we are in. We can go to the next slide. So some data. Another big problem is fewer competitive elections. In Ohio this year, out of our 15 congressional seats for the US House, only two are considered genuinely competitive. So that's about 13%. Nationally, it's only about 9%. 25 years ago, it was 18%. 10 years ago, it was 32%. So you can see sort of the road that we're on. Um, in Ohio, only 23% of Ohioans live in Ohio House districts that are competitive. Um, so just think about what that does to the average voter's incentive and morale when it comes to voting. If you are a voter advocate, how many times have you heard, why even bother, right? So let's talk a bit more about why all of this is. We can go to the next slide. So in the fewer competitive elections sphere, there are two big reasons why this is. One is gerrymandering, and the other is institutional flaws. Gerrymandering, I feel like in Ohio, especially in the last few years, we have talked a lot about this, but in gerrymandering, the districts are drawn to favor one party over another. And so one of the consequences of that is that general elections become less competitive. So the real race then is in the primary election itself. So the winner of the primary election becomes kind of the de facto winner in the fall. So primary voters have all that power. Primary voters are choosing the winner by default. And then with institutional flaws, there are incumbency advantages. So, sitting office holders have name recognition, they have funding raising networks, they have visibility that makes it difficult to challenge. There is campaign finance regulation failure, another thing that we have been talking about at the league for many, many years. Large donors and outside spending can discourage challengers and just reinforce existing power structures. And then there's just generally this more polarized electorate, and chicken egg. There's lots of factors here, but this is where we are, and voters are just increasingly aligned with one party over another, leaving fewer kind of persuadable voters in general elections. So, what does all this mean? It means that most general elections just really aren't competitive, and that the primary election is often where the real decision is happening, um, and that fewer voters are going to participate in that election, and that's what we see. So, when general elections aren't competitive, the primary election becomes the one that matters the most. We can go to the next slide. So I think we lost a slide there. So an important thing to know about all of this. Oh no, we can go back. Sorry, it got erased for a second. Um, Before we go on to the good stuff, let's just do a quick recap of the challenges of primaries. So low turnout, high partisanship, fewer competitive elections. And again, what does it mean? Most general elections just not competitive. Primary election not that's where the real decisions are happening. And again, fewer voters are participating in that election, which means that it is a minority of voters who are making the decisions that impact all of us. But truly, and this is not us being Pollyanna, we can change this. And now we can go to the next slide for real. So tell us, oh Pollyanna League lady, how can we change things? The solution is to empower voters. Here's why this matters. This can increase civic knowledge, and it will connect voters with their power. It will increase turnout, and it will widen the electorate. We could take this in a million different directions too, but we know that when it comes to primaries, voters don't know their power. They don't know that the stakes are really high, and they don't know the logistics. They don't know the how of voting. Many of them don't even know that they can vote. And each one of us can make a difference with that. And remember in the beginning, we talked about how the problems in the primary are like the canaries in the coal mine for democracy. We can flip that around and we can make a difference in the primary, which will then make an even bigger difference in the general election. So voters have an outsized election or influence in primary elections. And anything that we do to move the needle for voter participation in the primary in the right direction will pay dividends in the fall and beyond. So what do voters need to know? Well, again, 2026, poof. Um, there's a lot happening in Ohio. It's a midterm year everywhere, so that happens every 4 years in between presidential election years. It's often considered a referendum on the president or the highest person in power. This year federally, nationally, there are Senate races, there are House races. In Ohio, we have one U.S. House or Senate seat, and then each one of our 15 U.S. House seats. In the state, all of our executive offices are up for election. So that's our governor, our attorney general, our auditor, our secretary of state, our treasurer, two Ohio Supreme Court seats, half of our Ohio Senate seats, so 17 out of 33, and all 99 Ohio House seats. At the county level, county commissioners are up, county auditors are up, and county police judges are up. And then locally, there's all kinds of things going on. There's issues, there's levies, there's bonds. Going back quickly to the state races, unusually, all of the current office holders are term limited. And so none of the current incumbents are running for those seats again. So it's pretty unusual to have a year in which no incumbents are running. Now, a lot of the people who are current incumbents are kind of doing a lateral square dance and they're moving to, the lateral executive office. So you'll see a lot of familiar names, but they're not running for the same seat that they are currently holding. Let me go to the next slide.
All right, and this is me. So, why primaries matter? When more voters participate, the candidates are more likely to reflect what the public really wants, which we've talked about a little bit. They are more responsive. It's sending a clear signal about what voters care about, and we're talking about a larger block of voters and not just a select few. Candidates who win primaries are paying attention to this, and more candidates that people really like equals more participation and stronger democracy. When we're talking about, like Elizabeth said earlier, that people are also not engaging then in the general because they're not really excited about any of the candidates that came out of the primary. So this is something that we see where we're getting a better representation of what the entire voting bloc wants. And then in gerrymander districts where one party is dominant over another, the winner of the dominance party primary is likely to win the general election. So a lot of people who are, thinking about this as they're not part of that party, the actual election is taking place in the primary before we even get to the general election. And in 2024, 88% of the seats in Ohio were effectively decided before the general election. So, really thinking about that, 88% of the seats were decided by 20-ish% of the voters. You can really start to see where we are and how we got here. So, who can vote? This is an important one for people to know. We talked about this before that there is this misconception that you have to be with a political party or pre-registered with a party, and absolutely you do not. All eligible Ohio voters are able to vote in the primary as long as you registered 30 days before an election day. And I will also just use this plug to say, please double check your registration before every election so that you know that you are still registered and eligible to vote in your primary. All right. And here's kind of a fun one. Did you know that in Ohio, 17-year-olds who will be 18 on or before the general election and register to vote at least 30 days before the primary are allowed to vote? So they can vote on any candidate races in the primary. They cannot vote on issues or central committee races, essentially because any issues or central committee races that are on the primary are decided at that election. And the reason why they can vote on any candidate is because they will be voting in that November election. So they do get to have a say on what candidates advance. So if you know a 17-year-old who is turning 18 by the election, this is a great one to let them know, get them registered so that they can participate. And I also just kind of wanted to sidebar on that Ohio, we have a program called Youth at the Booth, where 17-year-olds can also be poll workers. And I know that this isn't really about that, but I do find that, getting them participating in the civic engagement process and understanding how the elections are run is also just another way we can get them to buy into their civic responsibility and bring others along with them. And they get money, and you can get school credits and stuff depending on what your school does. So that is a good one to share. So what about independent voters? Independent voters can vote for candidates in any party. So independent, also known as unaffiliated voters, they're just like any other voter in a primary. They will choose a partisan ballot if they want to stay unaffiliated. So we strongly encourage that every voter use all the voting power they have, but if they don't want a partisan ballot, they can still go vote on the nonpartisan ballot. So that could be, with issues or a nonpartisan candidate. But we do encourage to, think about even if you're an unaffiliated voter, what are your personal preferences for policy, character, which candidates do you think can do the best job, and, look beyond that partisan identity. And of course, we always recommend that voters research the candidates that are running to see if there's any that they connect with or any that they don't want to see in the general election. So how does it work when you show up at the polls in the primary? How do they know? You're going to talk to the poll worker when you check in, and they're going to ask if you want Democratic, Republican, or sometimes a Libertarian. We actually do have some Libertarian primaries this year. Um, and then if you're doing it by absentee ballot, the absentee ballot application will ask you which party's ballot you would like to receive. And then you just vote for your candidates. It's going to be just like any other election. You vote your ballot that they give you. Then there's also the nonpartisan ballot. So you could request that too if you wanted to do issues only or candidates without partisan labels. So that could be school boards, some judges, some local offices, and those aren't actually marked on the ballot. So you would have that and then any state and local issues and levies. And I will hand it back to Elizabeth.
So one of the biggest questions that we get is about party registration in Ohio. And again, because states are different, when people think about being a registered Republican or a registered independent or a registered Democrat, that's not so much a thing here. So registering with a party in Ohio is a little bit different. Party registration here happens when voters choose the party whose candidates they're voting on in the primary, and it's temporary. Registering does not commit the voter to voting for candidates in that party in the future. It's pretty meaningless, honestly. Um, every election, voters start with a clean slate. Choosing the party ballot is a one-time choice for that election. It's not a permanent label. Um, registering with a party, again, it just means that a voter chose that ballot for that party in the most recent primary. It doesn't mean anything for the voter after they've cast their ballot on that day. A question that we hear all the time, how can a voter change their party registration? The shorter answer is that you can't, at least not right away. Here are the two ways to do it, but they both take time. The first way, and probably the best way because it means that you're still voting, is to wait until the next primary election to vote on a ballot of a different party. Or you could not vote in a primary for 2 consecutive years. But we don't recommend this. We hope that we have convinced you by now that not voting in the primary is a mistake, but that is another way to do it. We can go to the next slide. So how do we talk about primaries? So we have this kind of core information now. What's the main takeaway for voters when you're talking to people? I think the most important thing is to tell voters that they have power. All Ohio voters are eligible to vote in Ohio primaries, and all of those voters have power. Independent voters, and in Ohio we call them unaffiliated voters, are eligible to vote in Ohio primaries. Again, registration does not mean anything. You walk in on the day of that you are voting and you choose the ballot that you want on that day. Ohioans do not have to be registered with a political party in advance. Just over 20% of eligible voters choose candidates for everyone else in Ohio's midterms. This was in the last one. So that means 1/5 of the electorate chose the kind of issues that we have focused on and the policies and the candidates that are promoted most heavily. Not great, right? That factoid, like that, 1 in 5 voters is the one that determines so many things. People have big reactions to. It really, to me, underscores how much power we all have to kind of tip that balance more in a real small d Democratic favor. Our voting voices are louder in a primary because right now, so So few people are participating in it. Um, Again, we don't love that so few people are participating in primaries. That's why we're here. But you know, let us find a silver lining and say that when you're talking to voters about why they should care, a big one is that their already huge voting power is even more enormous during a primary. And I think we can go to the next slide. So, still talking about power, talk about why using that power matters. So, again, Ohio gerrymandering, you don't need me to talk about it too much more, but Ohio is super gerrymandered. And so, a lot of the big races that we're going to see in the state house, especially, and in the US House districts, um, those are pretty gerrymandered seats, and every single one of those seats is up this year. There is a lot on the line. This year, every year, but really this year in Ohio and nationally. Like we talked about before, every single statewide executive office is up for election, and there are no incumbents. So the advantages typically held by the majority party are a little less even. Um, and again, this is a referendum election. This is the chance for Americans to tell the majority party how they feel like it's going. Decisions that are made in the primary set the tone for the general election. This is our chance to kind of send a message.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So, I want to give an example of how your vote matters. And I know there was also a question in the chat talking about young people specifically and engaging them. And I think for young people, and really a lot of people, it's finding that connection. We had these teach-ins where we talked more about how we're engaging with voters. And this is something that came up a lot, was really just trying to find that personal connection and hearing what matters to them. And something like this, as an example, can be really useful for people because you can really show them a real life example. And I'm sure that you could also find something that was similar in your area when you're going to talk to voters. So this example, talking about how your vote matters even more in primaries. In the Middletown school levy, it failed in 2022, which meant that they had fewer teachers, cuts to programs and coaching positions, and higher student activity fees. And then in 2025, that renewal was on the ballot to prevent even more elimination and cuts. So they were going to have to take away busing for grades 9 through 12, cutting more teaching and admin positions, and then again increasing those activity fees for students to participate. So, that's something that affects people directly when you're looking at how are you going to drive your child to school now because they don't have a bus and they can't afford to do athletics because you can't afford the activity fees. So this is something that really affects people. So when it went up on the ballot in the 2025 primary, let's see here. The result, 12,000 or 1,247 total voters, which was 7.6% turnout. That's who made that decision. And so it ended up being tied on election night. And then after the final count with the ballots, absentee ballots and everything that came in, it ended up being 621 for and 626 against the levy. So that means 5 voters determined funding for an entire school district. 5 voters. And I know we talk about this a lot. It's a frequent challenge that we give in voting circles about, can you text 5 friends? Literally, you could have texted 5 friends and swung an entire election and affected school funding. You could have taken some family members and that could change the election. So I really think it's helpful to find these examples in your area or things that you know about when you're talking to voters. And even for this, a 17-year-old who's in high school, that this might be their first election, and talking about why elections matter, they might relate to this. It might have been them who had to quit basketball because their parents couldn't afford it, or had to figure out how to get to school when the busing stopped, or maybe their favorite teacher was laid off and an extracurricular. There's so many things. So I think when we're talking about that hook or how we're getting people engaged, think about what's going on in your area or with the people that you are speaking to. Find out what matters to them and then engage with them in that way. Let's see this.
7%. I'm gonna think about that one for a little while. So some messaging do's and don'ts. So we've talked about voter power. Everybody on this call today has considerable power. I'm a comms person. One of the things in my world is media. Media is a disaster these days. It's fractured. It's owned by corporations. Nobody believes it. That's all terrible. The other side of that, though, is that that makes our individual voices more powerful than they have been before. Um, our our trust and credibility that we have within our own networks. And networks can be something as small as a family group chat, it can be your coworkers, it can be a broader, your Facebook feed. However, you're communicating to other people, those people know you to be a credible person who knows things. And so you get to use that credibility to do some good in the world. So here are just some basic tips. About how to talk about primaries. You'll see one through line in the don'ts, but the do's. So do talk about all Ohio voters' eligibility in Ohio primaries. Emphasize that all Ohio voters can participate, including independents, and that no party registration is required in advance. Don't shame voters for not voting. A thing that I think is starting to wane a little, but was a trend for a long time in pro-voting circles was to say, like you get the government you deserve if you don't vote, or uh, you know, if you are failing your civic duty, or just you're not a good American. We know better now. We know that there are all kinds of reasons that people don't vote that are rational and valid, and that it's actually our job to help provide people with reasons to feel like their voice matters and their vote matters. So you're going to hear me say it a couple more times. Do promote extra power that voters have in a primary. So again, fewer voters, like Heather was saying, means that each vote carries more weight. Don't shame voters for not voting. Do talk about how 1/5 of the voters in Ohio chose candidates for 100% of Ohioans. So 1 in 5 voters currently choosing the candidates for everyone else. And that doesn't just mean candidates, that means the discourse, that means the conversations that we're having, that means the policies that are being set. So that 1 out of 5 voter, like that person has a lot of power. Don't feel like you should all say it with me, except you can't because you're all muted. Don't shame voters for not voting. Do talk about what's on the ballot. Again, this is a huge year. In the years that are a little quieter, when they're municipal election years, there are no small elections. Talk about how those races impact our daily lives, whether it is a school board member, a city council person, senator, any person that's running for office, they're going to have an impact on our lives, and figure out how to talk about it with them. We are always happy to help. So if you've got thoughts, we are always there to talk about it. Don't shame voters for not voting. And then finally, do ask them if they have a voting plan, because this is all well and good to get people passionate and riled up, but if people don't know practically and logistically how to vote, it kind of all falls apart. And one way that we've found that is really successful to help people really think about the step by step of what they are going to do to vote is just to ask, what's your voting plan? Do you know how you're going to vote? When are you going to vote? You're going to vote by mail? You're going to vote early? You're going to vote on election day? There are great reasons to do all three of those. Have you registered? Have you checked your registration recently? There is more and more reason to have everybody be doing that. We always said before every election, we are going to be saying, do it more often than that. So that's another talking point that you can share with people. And that helps them feel engaged in the process too. Like, oh, I did a thing. I checked my registration. I updated my registration. And again, don't shame voters for not voting. Heather.
Thank you. All right, so this is solvable. Yay! We're going to empower voters by increasing civic knowledge. So remember, we're going to connect voters with their power, increase turnout, and that will widen the electorate. So we've got this, loop of increasing that and how that all connects. And, like Elizabeth said in the last one, don't shame voters. Um, Also, be the person that feels good. It makes voters feel good about asking questions. I'm sure a lot of you experience this. I know I do on election day, where I just am ready that my phone will be buzzing a lot with people asking me different questions, or, even in advance, they'll send me a message. And I love to be that person. I'm glad that they know that they can come to me for help, and I think we all feel good about it because then they are able to go participate. And I feel good that I've helped them with any barriers that they might have or questions. So this is what, we're giving them that power, telling them how to, not how to vote, how they can vote, and telling them the important things they need to know about, like checking their registration. So, our call to action for you all today is to share our primary information graphic on your socials. We have a post on Facebook, but we will also send those graphics in the follow-up email, and so you can share them easily. We do have it's a smaller, like a graphic version of our primary card that talks about primary elections and why they are important. So share that out so that people can see that with the dates so that they know when they need to register, when early vote starts, all of that information. And then text 5 friends and tell them to check their voter registration at voteohio.gov. And then, Elizabeth talked a little bit about this with the primary voting plan. How are they going to go? What method are they using? When are they going? And also, you can check Vote 411, which is the LWV voting information website where we put our candidate questionnaires. But also, you could check your polling place. That's always a good one, too. Just confirm that your polling place has not changed, that your registration's up to date, what's on your ballot. All of those things are great. So help people make sure that they know all of those things in advance. And then also come to our State House Day on March 25th, which is actually a week from today. We will be in Columbus, and we will be visiting with lawmakers and advocating for our priorities. And also, you can connect with your local league. So if you are not a league member, we will send out all of this, and you can find your closest league. So if you're wanting to get more involved, but you're just not quite sure where to start, or you would like to have some support, please feel free to find your local league and connect, and see how you can help get the word out about primaries. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Well, that is the big stuff, but I wanted to take a few minutes to answer folks' questions in the chat because we were uh, talking so much, and so we didn't get to answer everybody. Um, sorry, Whitney. And I'm going to go backwards, which is like the dumbest way to answer questions, but it makes sense in my brain. Don't ask questions. Oh, thank you, Anne. Yes, we do have a piece about making a voting plan, and I just made a note to myself that I will include that for you all in a follow-up. So that's good. That's a good one. The registration deadline, we covered that. That is April 6th. So a hard copy of the voter guide for the primary, that depends on where you live. Some local leagues do that. Other leagues don't. All local leagues will have put with our support candidate information into Vote 411. And so for those of you who are not familiar with Vote 411, Vote 411 is kind of a personalized Secretary of State website in a box isn't the right word, but you can kind of get all the answers to your voting questions in one place. So you can put in your address, and it puts all of the candidates that are on the ballot, answers to questions that we've asked candidates. It has, where your polling place is. It has things like deadline for registration, and just a ton of other things. It's super useful. So all the things that would typically go into a hard copy voter guide are in vote411.org. Uh, So paper copy of candidate and issues. So again, that depends on the local league, depending on where you are. Donna, Jog has undertaken a special project to promote primary participation. Awesome. Postcards, one dilemma. If we encourage participation in dominant party because that is a real race in gerrymandered district, even less participation in the non-dominant. How to address? I'm not sure I understand the question. So are you saying, and I'm sorry, this is like the terrible thing about a webinar is that it's so one-sided, that even though it's a gerrymandered district, you aren't wanting to, no, I need more information, I think.
I think I'm not sure, but maybe she can do some follow-up, Donna. It sounded to me like she was saying if you're encouraging participation, saying like the real race is going to happen in the primary, that you're kind of decreasing participation for the minority party and maybe concerned about partisanship. I'm not sure. That's kind of how I was taking it, but Donna, if you're still here, send us some more details.
Kind of moving further up the chat, are there good handouts defining primaries and telling why we should vote in them? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, we will be sharing that with you. And then we also have that on our social pages. And I have to say, like, I run our socials for the league, and that explainer was one of the most like widely shared viral things that we've done. It had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views and shares. So I think this is going to be a big election, which is very exciting for those of us who care about these things, which is every single one of us on the call. Um, and then kind of a couple questions about young people, and I know Heather, you answered this a little bit. Um, how to convince young people to bother to vote. I mean, this is like a whole multi-series webinar right there. I think the big one, like the one that I talk about with my daughter is, um, why do you think they're not talking to you? Why do you think that they're not interested? Because that's something that we hear from young people all the time is that their messaging is not to them. Their policies, their platforms, they're clearly not for a 20-year-old or a 28-year-old, 18-year-old. And it's because they know that they're not going to vote, or they believe that they're not going to vote. And so participating in elections means that the candidates will start paying attention to them, and it's not a quick fix. But that's something that I think does resonate with people. There's more to come on that one. And yeah, we're doing all kinds of policies, which if you are a league member, please participate. And if you're not a league member, consider being a league member or just volunteering. You do not have to be a league member to participate in our work. Heather, are you seeing questions that I didn't see? I'm going to go back to the beginning.
Yeah, there's a new one that came up. In a bright red county with no D's running, how do you encourage Democrats to vote in the primary?
Not our business. We encourage everybody to be participating, full stop. So, yeah. What else? Yeah, Vote 401, as Jen said, is almost finished. It is a beast to put together. There are almost 1,000 candidates. Is that right, Heather?
Yes.
Don't ask us about Central Committee. We will just start rocking back and forth. Um,
But the emails are out and the answers are coming in and we will have it up for you all very soon. So we got a lot of responses coming in today and
and
the last few days. So
what are we missing?
um Leslie has a not primary related question there at the bottom. I don't know if you want to.
I love unrelated questions.
Listen.
Oof. Is there any hope of getting the anti-gerrymandering on the ballot again? Oh, Jen is raising her hand. Can we take you off mute? I don't know if that's in our
I
power.
think we can, Jen, for
Hold.
oh,
Yeah, for
oh,
webinar.
yes, wait, I can.
Oh, good. You're so smart.
All right, go ahead, Jen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wow, look at us working technology like pros. So, Leslie, that absolutely will come back. We will not stop our anti gerrymandering efforts. Our anti gerrymandering efforts actually started in the 1960s in Ohio, and most hard things in democracy take a very long time. And we will definitely do it again. But in the meantime, we need to grow local leagues. We need more members. We need more voters engaged in the process so that when we get our clipboards out and when we start asking people to vote yes again on a constitutional amendment, we're even stronger for that campaign.
Nailed it. For those who don't know Jen is the executive director of the league. I know a lot of you do know her. Material for State House Day says that the day goes on until 5:30. So we have it going until 5:30 because a lot of folks are going to leave the hotel and or the State House and come back to our offices and pick up materials. So we're hanging out until 5:30 to make sure that we can be available for everybody, but the day does not have to be till 5:30 for everyone. Um,
And
yeah,
Joan, there could be some of you could have legislative meetings that go later in the day. We're going to take any legislative meeting we can get. And we often don't have the privilege of just saying, well, this is the only time we can meet. So there could be some people that have a meeting, later in the afternoon.
I am looking at the official Q&A. So I just wanted to respond to those. First, Howard celebrates 250 years of democracy by voting, 100 million percent, yes. Um, and Randy, there are no league chapters by you. That is sad, and we are sorry to hear that. You can join the state league, however, you don't have to be limited to a local league. And that way you get all of our resources and access to our charter meetings. And if you have a few people around you who are actually, don't you think you could mute?
There you go.
If you have a few like-minded friends in your community, you can form your own kind of baby league. We call them I just forgot what they're called because it's been a really long day. They're like little offshoot leagues. And so that's something that we're seeing more and more of. We've had just a few already in the last like 6 months or so. So if you've got a little community of folks that would be interested, talk to us. And about 17-year-olds, can they work the polls if only if they'll be 18 by the general election, or can any 18-year-old do that?
I think any 17-year old students is what the Youth at the Booth program says.
A great.
17 and 18, juniors and seniors. So if it's a 17-year-old who's a sophomore, not that that's common, they would not be able to work the polls.
Possible, but okay. And then Raji, I just am seeing your question. Yeah, anytime. You just go and you say, today I'm voting this way, and that's it. So I think people get really hung up on but I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. In Ohio, it's pretty nebulous. And there are more people who are unaffiliated in Ohio than belong to either party.
And I will add too, when you're talking
Yeah.
to people who may have some uncertainty about this process, I know people have come to me before that felt like very intimidated or, unsure about having that conversation with the poll worker. Like, let them know too that that's okay. That's the normal process that, they're going to ask you what ballot you want to do, and that's so that they can give you the right ballot, not because they're trying to like, target you or anything based on your party.
Julia asked, how do we stage rallies to get people to register to vote? I love this question. So I have a few answers. One is that rallies are happening all around. Tap into those. But the biggest one is to find your closest League of Women Voters and see what they've got going on. You don't need to reinvent a wheel because we bet there's probably stuff already happening. To add on to amplify existing efforts, I think it's pretty tough to do things as an individual. So I'm going to again plug the league, and then just community in general, being with finding people who share this passion and working together with them to do that. Did we answer all the questions? Maybe.
Yes, I just sent it a text, but Leslie, thank you for coming, and we will be sending those out in email so that you can see the shareable posts that we have that you can put on your socials. And then always, feel free to follow our Facebook, Instagram. Elizabeth does a great job with those. So if you ever see anything on there, you can share and help boost whatever current message we're trying to get out to voters.
Thank you so much for being here, everybody. This primary is a really big deal, and we really hope that you can share some of this information with your friends and your family and just random people in the street.
I love telling random people on the street about voting.
And they love it when you do it too. Everyone loves a random stranger telling them things. Oh, thanks, everybody. Thanks for being such a wonderful audience.
Yes, thank you all.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you for being here. Take care.